讀你聽嘅時間，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 我哋讀到 Part 2嘅第72節，呢一節叫做 Of how Don Quixote and Sancho reached their village。顧名思義，侍從兩人終於翻到鄉下咯。上一回咧就講到佢哋回程嘅路上 ，Sancho 就表演鞭打自己，鞭埋佢身後邊嘅樹嘅一個懲罰儀式，都令到 Don Quixote 好重心嘅。之後大家下榻咗一個小店旅館 ，Don Quixote 都冇再將佢當作為城堡啦。咁會唔會暗示住 Don Quixote 幻覺、浪漫主義有所收斂呢？之後佢哋喺房入面見到嘅一啲畫作，令到兩位有好多聯想。好，我哋睇下呢一節兩位侍從回鄉，佢哋會發生咩事
？All that day, Don Quixote and Sancho remained in the village and inn, waiting for night, the one to finish off his task of scourging in the open country, the other to see it accomplished, for therein lay the accomplishment of his wishes. Meanwhile, there arrived at the hostelry a traveller on horseback with 3 or 4 servants, one of whom said to him, who appeared to be the master, "Here, Signor Don Alvaro Tarfe, your worship may take your siesta today. The quarters seem clean and cool." When he heard this, Don Quixote said to Sancho, "Look here, Sancho, on turning over the leaves of that book, the second part of my history, I think I came casually upon this name of Don Alvaro Tarfe." "Very likely," said Sancho. "We had better let him dismount, and by we can ask about it." The gentleman dismounted, and the landlady gave him a room on the ground floor opposite Don Quixote's and adorned with painted serge hangings of the same sort. The newly arrived gentleman put on a summer coat, and coming out to the gateway of the hostelry, which was wide and cool, addressing Don Quixote, who was pacing up and down there, he asked, "In what direction is your worship bound, gentle sir?" "To a village near this, which is my own village," replied Don Quixote. "And your worship, where are you bound for?" "I am going to Granada, Signor," said the gentleman, "to my own country." "And a goodly country," said Don Quixote. "But will your worship do me the favour of telling me your name? For it strikes me it is of more importance to me to know it than I can tell you." "My name is Don Alvaro Tarfe," replied the traveller. To which Don Quixote returned, "I have no doubt whatever that your worship is that Don Alvaro Tarfe, who appears in print in the second part of the history of Don Quixote of La Mancha, lately printed and published by a new author." "I am the same," replied the gentleman, "and that same Don Quixote, the principal personage in the said history, was a very great friend of mine, and it was I who took him away from home, or at least induced him to come to some jousts that were to be held at Saragossa, whither I was going myself. Indeed, I showed him many kindnesses, and saved him from having his shoulders touched up by the executioner because of his extreme rashness." "Tell me, Signor Don Alvaro," said Don Quixote, "am I at all like that Don Quixote you talk of?" "No, indeed," replied the traveller, "not a bit." "And that Don Quixote," said Awan, "had he with him a squire called Sancho Panza?" "He had," said Don Alvaro, "but though he had the name of being very droll, I never heard him say anything that had any drollery in it." "That I can well believe," said Sancho at this, "for to come out with drolleries is not in everybody's line, and that Sancho your worship speaks of, gentle sir, must be some great scoundrel, dunderhead, and thief, all in one, for I am the real Sancho Panza, and I have more drolleries than if it rained them. Let your worship only try. Come along with me for a year or so, and you will find they fall from me at every turn, and so rich and so plentiful that though mostly I don't know what I am saying, I make everybody that hears me laugh. And the real Don Quixote of La Mancha, the famous, the valiant, the wise, the lover, the righter of wrongs, the guardian of minors and orphans, the protector of widows, the killer of damsels, he who has for his sole mistress the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, is this gentleman before you, my master. All other Don Quixotes and all other Sancho Panzas are dreams and mockeries." "By God, I believe it," said Don Alvaro, "for you have uttered more drolleries, my friend, in the few words you have spoken than the other Sancho Panza in all I have ever heard from him, and they were not few. He was more greedy than well-spoken, and more dull than droll, and I am convinced that the enchanters who persecute Don Quixote the good have been trying to persecute me with Don Quixote the bad. But I don't know what to say, for I am ready to swear I left him shut up in the Casa del Nuncio at Toledo. And here another Don Quixote turns up, though a very different one from mine. I don't know whether I'm good, said Don Quixote, but I can safely say I am not the bad. And to prove it, let me tell you, Señor Don Alvaro Tarfe, I have never in my life been in Zaragoza. So far from that, when it was told me that this imaginary Don Quixote had been present at the jousts in that city, I declined to enter it, in order to drag his falsehood before the face of the world. And so I went on straight to Barcelona, the treasure house of courtesy, haven of strangers, asylum of the poor, home of the valiant, champion of the wronged, pleasant exchange of firm friendships, and city unrivaled in sight and beauty. And though the adventures that befell me there are not by any means matters of enjoyment, but rather of regret, I do not regret them, simply because I have seen it. In a word, Señor Don Alvaro Tarfe, I am Don Quixote of La Mancha, the one that fame speaks of, and not the unlucky one that has attempted to usurp my name and deck himself out in my ideas. I entreat your worship by your devoir as a gentleman to be as good as to make a declaration before the alcalde of this village that you never in all your life saw me until now, and that neither am I the Don Quixote in print in the second part, nor the Sancho Panza, my squire, the one your worship knew. That I will do most willingly, replied Don Alvaro, though it amazes me to find two Don Quixotes and two Sancho Panzas at once, as much alike the names as they differ in demeanor. And again I say and declare that what I saw I cannot have seen, and that what happened me cannot have happened. No doubt your worship is enchanted, like my lady Dulcinea de Toboso, said Sancho, and would to heaven your disenchantment rested on my giving myself another 3,000 and odd lashes like what I'm giving myself for her, for I'd lay them on without looking for anything. I don't understand that about the lashes, said Don Alvaro. Sancho replied that it was a long story to tell, but he would tell him if they happened to be going the same road. By this dinner time arrived, and Don Quixote and Don Alvaro dined together. The alcalde of the village came by chance into the inn together with a notary, and Don Quixote laid a petition before him, showing that it was requisite for his rights that Don Alvaro Tarfe, the gentleman there present, should make a declaration before him that he did not know Don Quixote of La Mancha, also there present, and that he was not the one that was in print in a history entitled Second Part of Don Quixote of La Mancha by one Avellaneda of Tordesillas. The alcalde finally put it in legal form, and a declaration was made with all the formalities required in such cases, at which Don Quixote and Sancho were in high delight, as if a declaration of the sort was of any great importance to them, and as if their words and deeds did not plainly show the difference between the two Don Quixotes and the two Sanchos. Many civilities and offers of service were exchanged by Don Alvaro and Don Quixote, in the course of which the great Manchegan displayed such good taste that he disabused Don Alvaro of the error he was under, and he, on his part, felt convinced he must have been enchanted, now that he had been brought in contact with two such opposite Don Quixotes. Evening came, they set out from the village, and after about half a league 2 roads branched off, one leading to Don Quixote's village, the other the road Don Alvaro was to follow. In this short interval, Don Quixote told him of his unfortunate defeat, and of Dulcinea's enchantment and the remedy, all which threw Don Alvaro into fresh amazement, and embracing Don Quixote and Sancho, he went his way, and Don Quixote went his. That night he passed among trees again in order to give Sancho an opportunity of working out his penance, which he did in the same fashion as the night before, at the expense of the bark of the beech trees much more than of his back, of which he took such good care that the lashes would not have knocked off a fly had there been one there. The Duke Don Quixote did not miss a single stroke of the count, and he found that together with those of the night before, they made up 3,029. The sun apparently had got up early to witness the sacrifice, and with his light they resumed their journey, discussing the deception practiced on Don Alvaro, and saying how well done it was to have taken his declaration before a magistrate in such an impeachable form. That day and night they travelled on, nor did anything worth mention happen to them, unless it was that in the course of the night Sancho finished off his task, whereat Don Quixote was beyond measure joyful. He watched for daylight to see if along the road he should fall in with his already disenchanted lady Dulcinea, and as he pursued his journey there was no woman he met that he did not go up to see if she was Dulcinea the Toboso, as he held it absolutely certain that Merlin's promises could not lie. Full of these thoughts and anxieties, they ascended a rising ground wherefrom they descried their own village, at the sight of which Sancho fell on his knees, exclaiming, "Open thine eyes, long for home, and see how thy son Sancho Panza comes back to thee, if not very rich, very well whipped. Open thine arms and receive too thy son Don Quixote, who, if he comes vanquished by the arm of another, comes victor over himself, which, as he himself has told me, is the greatest victory anyone can desire. I'm bringing back money, for if I was well whipped, I went mounted like a gentleman." "Have done with these fooleries," said Don Quixote. "Let us push on straight and get to our own place, where we will give free range to our fancies, and settle our plans for our future pastoral life." With this, they descended the slope and directed their steps to their village.
好，呢一節讀出現咗個人物叫 Don Tarfe， 佢咧同 Don Quixote 一樣，都係下榻喺同一間旅館。Don Quixote 無意喺門口聽到呢個旅客嘅名，就諗起，咦，佢先前喺巴塞隆納睇過呢一本冒認嘅書，假冒嘅書，有關於 Don Quixote 嘅 Part 2，就有呢個名喎。咁於是乎佢上前問佢，呢個人咧就同 Don Quixote 講，係啊，我係認識 Don Quixote 呢個人。Don Quixote 就話，佢個外表似唔似我？佢話一啲都唔似。然之後就問佢，咁你又知唔知道佢有個侍從叫 Sancho Panza 㗎？佢話我知啊，我見過佢啊。你咪似唔似我身邊呢一位啊？佢話一啲都唔似。Sancho 就忍唔住走出嚟講話，有一個人要做咁多滑稽嘅嘢咧，唔容易㗎，係我先做到㗎。嗱，我身邊咧就係獨一無二、至高無上嘅 Don Quixote 啦。你知唔知你搞錯咗？Don Tarfe 咧即時俾 Sancho 嘅長篇大論咧就折服咗，因為覺得 Sancho 講嘢實在太滑稽、太傻啦，同佢喺路上見到個假冒嘅咧完全唔同，甚至乎咧仲有話係佢見過 Don Quixote 咧都係唔好嘅，呢個先係好嘅。而Don Quixote聽到咁樣，當然係龍顏大悅，十分高興啦。咁巧咧，又有一個公證員就下榻館，於是乎咧Don Quixote就拉住呢個公證，就要 Tarfe 宣誓，寫低物證，就係話咧佢之前見嘅咧都係假冒嘅，佢而家遇到嘅Don Quixote同 Sancho 咧先至係原裝正版嘅。二人就相見甚歡，進餐傾咗好多偈。Tarfe 就問Don Quixote 嘅近況，Don Quixote有啲傷心就話我係打輸咗啊，決鬥輸咗，於是乎要返鄉，我嘅情人都中咗巫術啊，需要解咒。Tarfe 將所有故事都聽咗入耳，因為兩個人返鄉嘅路上都係重疊嘅，咁但係到最後大家都係要各奔前程。Tarfe 聽到Don Quixote 嘅所有事都覺得好難過，亦都希望咧Don Quixote可以重新振作。分別之後，Don Quixote同 Sancho 亦都冇偷懶。Sancho 咧一有時間就鞭打自己，當然都係重施故技嘅，就係鞭打自己後面棵樹，就唔係鞭打自己嘅背脊。Don Quixote都照單全收，而結果咧佢哋真係打足過3000幾下。理論上呢個魔咒嘅終於都要解除。到呢一節嘅尾聲，二人終於回到故鄉啦。Sancho 話大叫啦：你嘅兒子翻嚟啦！還有我 Sancho 嘅Don Quixote嘅翻嚟啦。好，我哋睇下啲字有啲咩字同大家分享。Devoir D-E-V-O-I-R 名詞 ，a person's duty 一個人嘅職責，一個人嘅責任。呢一本書好少見到一啲法文嘅影響嘅字，咁呢個算係其中之一個。Pastoral P-A-S-T-O-R-A-L 文中嘅係形容詞，形容咩咧 ？Of land used for the keeping or grazing of sheep or cattle。臨尾有一句Don Quixote就 pastoral life， 作為一個牧羊者，一個牧羊，有個原野咁樣嘅意思。好，呢節讀到呢度，下一次繼續讀你聽，拜拜。 讀你聽2.0，今日繼續讀 Miguel de Cervantes 嘅 Don Quixote， 我哋讀到 Part 2嘅第73節，呢一節叫做 Of the omens Don Quixote had as he entered his own village, and other incidents that embellish and give a colour to this great history。上一回咧就講到侍從兩人遇到一個叫做 Tarfe 嘅人，佢咧就聲稱佢遇到過 Don Quixote 同 Sancho， 當然佢遇到嘅咧都係冇牌貨。Don Quixote 同 Sancho 亦都企出嚟話俾佢聽，你遇到嘅係冇牌貨，必須要做見證，話俾世人聽咧，你所見到嘅嘢都係假嘅，我哋先至係真嘅。有一番嘅折騰，冰釋前嫌之後咧做到好友，於是乎就大家一齊上路回鄉，但係去到最尾都要各散東西嘅。臨翻到去村之前 ，Sancho 亦都不忘佢嘅承諾，又鞭打佢自己同埋佢身後面棵樹，令到咧佢自己嘅傷害降到最低。Don Quixote都照單全收嘅。咁我哋睇下呢一節佢哋兩人翻到去村入邊發生咩事啊
？At the entrance of the village, so says Cide Hamete, Don Quixote saw two boys quarrelling on the village threshing floor, one of whom said to the other, Take it easy, Periquil. Thou shalt never see it again as long as thou livest. Don Quixote heard this, and said he to Sancho, Dost thou not mark, friend, what that boy said? Thou shalt never see it again as long as thou livest. Well, said Sancho, what does it matter if the boy said so? What, said Don Quixote, dost thou not see that, applied to the object of my desires, the words mean that I am never to see Dulcinea more? Sancho was about to answer, when his attention was diverted by seeing a hare come flying across the plain pursued by several greyhounds and sportsmen. In its terror, it ran to take shelter and hide itself under Dapple. Sancho caught it alive and presented it to Don Quixote, who was saying, Bad omen, bad omen. A hare flies, greyhounds chase it, Dulcinea appears not. Your worship's a strange man, said Sancho. Let's take it for granted that this hare is Dulcinea, and these greyhounds chasing it the malignant enchanters who turned her into a country wench. She flies, and I catch her and put her into your worship's hands, and you hold her in your arms and cherish her. What bad sign is that, or what ill omen is there to be found here? The two boys who had been quarrelling came over to look at the hare, and Sancho asked one of them what their quarrel was about. He was answered by the one who had said, Thou shalt never see it again as long as thou livest. That he had taken a cage full of crickets from the other boy, and did not mean to give it back to him as long as he lived. Sancho took out 4 cuartos from his pocket and gave them to the boy for the cage, which he placed in Don Quixote's hands, saying, There, Signor, there are the omens broken and destroyed, and they have no more to do with our affairs. To my thinking, fool as I am, than with last year's clouds. And if I remember rightly, I have heard the curate of our village say that it does not become Christians or sensible people to give any heed to these silly things. And even you yourself said the same to me some time ago, telling me that all Christians who minded omens were fools. But there's no need of making words about it. Let us push on and go into our village. The sportsmen came up and asked for their hare, which Don Quixote gave them. They then went on, and upon the green at the entrance of the town they came upon the curate and the bachelor Samson Carrasco busy with their breviaries. It should be mentioned that Sancho had thrown, by way of a sumpter cloth, over Dapple and over the bundle of armour, the buckram robe painted with flames which they had put upon him at the Duke's castle the night Altisidora came back to life. He had also fixed the mitre on Dapple's head, the oddest transformation and decoration that ever ass in the world underwent. They were at once recognized by both the curate and the bachelor, who came towards them with open arms. Don Quixote dismounted and received them with a close embrace, and the boys, who are lynxes that nothing escapes, spied out the ass's mitre and came running to see it, calling out to one another, Come here, boys, and see Sancho Panza's ass figged out finer than Mingo, and Don Quixote's beast leaner than ever. So at length, with the boys capering round them, and accompanied by the curate and the bachelor, they made their entrance into the town, and proceeded to Don Quixote's house, at the door of which they found his housekeeper and niece, whom the news of his arrival had already reached. It had been brought to Teresa Panza, Sancho's wife as well, and she, with her hair all loose and half naked, dragged Sanchica, her daughter, by the hand, ran out to meet her husband, but seeing him coming in by no means as good case as she thought a governor ought to be, she said to him, "How is it you come this way, husband? It seems to me you come tramping and footsore, and looking more like a disorderly vagabond than a governor." "Hold your tongue, Teresa," said Sancho. "Often where there are pegs there are no flitches. Let's go into the house, and there you'll hear strange things. I bring money, and that's the main thing. Got by my own industry without wronging anybody." "You bring the money, my good husband," said Teresa, "and no matter whether it was got this way or that, for, however you may have got it, you'll not have brought any new practice into the well." Sanchica embraced her father and asked him if he brought her anything, for she had been looking out for him as for the showers of May. And she, taking hold of him by the girdle on one side and his wife by the hand, while the daughter led Dapple, they made for their house, leaving Don Quixote in the hands of his niece and housekeeper, and in the company of the curate and the bachelor. Don Quixote at once, without any regard to time or season, withdrew in private with the bachelor and the curate, and in a few words told them of his defeat, and of the engagement he was under not to quit his village for a year, which he meant to keep to the letter without departing a hair's breadth from it, as became a knight-errant bound by scrupulous good faith and the laws of knight-errantry, and of how he thought of turning shepherd for that year and taking his diversion in the solitude of the fields, where he could with perfect freedom give range to his thoughts of love while he followed the virtuous pastoral calling. And he besought them, if they had not a great deal to do and were not prevented by more important business, to consent to be his companions, for he would buy sheep enough to qualify them for shepherds. And the most important point of the whole affair, he could tell them, was settled, for he had given them names that would fit them to a T. The curate asked what they were. Don Quixote replied that he himself was to be called the shepherd Quixotes, and the bachelor the shepherd Carrasco, and the curate the shepherd Curambro, and Sancho Panza the shepherd Panchino. Both were astounded at Don Quixote's new craze. However, lest he should once more make off out of the village from them in pursuit of his chivalry, they, trusting that in the course of the year he might be cured, fell in with his new project, applauded his crazy idea as a bright one, and offered to share the light with him. "And what's more," said Samson Carrasco, "I am, as all the world knows, a very famous poet, and I'll be always speaking verses, pastoral or courtly, or as it may come into my head, to pass away our time in those secluded regions where we shall be roaming. But what is more needful, sirs, is that each of us should choose the name of the shepherdess he means to glorify in his verses, and that we should not leave a tree, be it ever so hard, without writing up and carving her name on it, as is the habit and custom of love-smitten shepherds." "That's the very thing," said Don Quixote, "though I am relieved from looking for the name of an imaginary shepherdess, for there's the peerless Dulcinea del Toboso, the glory of these brooksides, the ornament of these meadows, the mainstay of beauty, the cream of all the graces, and, in the word, the being to whom all praise is appropriate, be it ever so hyperbolical." "Very true," said the curate, "but we the others must look about for accommodating shepherdesses that will answer our purpose one way or another. And," added Samson Carrasco, "if they fail us, we can call them by the names of the ones in print that the world is filled with, Velides, Amaryllises, Dianas, Faridas, Galateas, Berissadas, for as they sell them in the marketplaces, we may fairly buy them and make them our own. If my lady, or I should say my shepherdess, happens to be called Anna, I'll sing her praises under the name of Anada, and if Francisca, I'll call her Francinia, and if Lucia, Lucinda, for it all comes to the same thing. And Sancho Panza, if he joins this fraternity, may glorify his wife Teresa Panza as Teresaina." Don Quixote laughed at the adaptation of the name, and the curate bestowed fast praise upon the worthy and honourable resolution he had made, and again offered to bear him company all the time that he could spare from his imperative duties. And so they took their leave of him, recommending and beseeching him to take care of his health and treat himself to a suitable diet. It so happened his niece and the housekeeper overheard all the three of them said, and as soon as they were gone, they both of them came in to Don Quixote and said to the niece, "What's this, uncle? Now that we were thinking you had come back to stay at home and lead a quiet, respectable life there, are you going to get into fresh entanglements and turn young shepherd, thou that comest here, young shepherd going there? Nay, indeed, the straw is too hard now to make pipes of." And, added the housekeeper, will your worship be able to bear, out in the fields, the heats of the summer and the chills of winter and the howling of the wolves? Not you, for that's a life and a business for hardy men, bred and seasoned to such work almost from the time they were in swaddling clothes. Why, to make choice of evils, it's better to be a knight-errant than a shepherd. Look here, Signor, take my advice, and I'm not giving it to you full of bread and wine, but fasting, and with 50 years upon my head. Stay at home, look after your affairs, go often to confession, be good to the poor, and upon my soul be it if any evil comes to you. Hold your peace, my daughters, said Don Quixote. I know very well what my duty is. Help me to bed, for I don't feel very well. And rest assured that knight-errant now, or wandering shepherd to be, I shall never fail to have a care for your interests, as you will see in the end. And the good wenches, the housekeeper and niece, helped him to bed, where they gave him something to eat and made him as comfortable as possible.
好，呢一節咧就講是從兩人入村之後，入村之際啦，遇到兩個小朋友喺度玩喎，咁佢哋咧就喺度大叫，呢件事永遠唔會發生噶啦。當Quixote聽到咧就覺得係一個唔好嘅預兆，係一個兇兆。意思咧即係話咧，佢唔會見到佢嘅情人Dulcinea。Sancho 咧就話點會咧？你嘅諗太多啦，你應該咧諗好嘅一方面。Sancho 就用少少錢啦，喺兩個男仔手咧就買咗一個小籠啦，裏面裝咗一啲食粟，就話俾佢聽啦，我就幫你解除魔咒噶啦，冇嘢噶啦。當Quixote咧於是乎就心安咗少少。入到村之後咧，好快咧遇到神父啦，同埋學生 Carrasco 啦，咁佢哋咧好開心見到侍從咁迎接佢哋啦。當然仲有 Sancho 嘅屋企人啦，當Quixote嘅兒生女啦，同埋佢嘅管家咁，大家一齊好高興相聚啦。當Quixote都好快咁講俾佢聽，佢哋俾一個騎士打敗咗，而佢需要用1年時間放低騎士嘅身份，而佢自己打算點做咧？就做牧羊者。幫大家所有人都改晒名，亦都希望大家陪佢一齊去牧羊、去放牧，過一個新嘅生活。另一邊廂，當Quixote兒生女同埋佢管家聽到當Quixote有咁嘅計劃，同佢講話：你呢個計劃咧係不切實際啊！你實在年紀太大，身子太虛弱啊！你唔可以承受喺田地嗰度耕作，風吹雨打，體力勞動呢啲咧係俾另外一啲人一出世就要做嗰啲人去做嘅。你就唔係，你咧就中途轉職，身體咧一定會支撐唔住㗎。好，我哋睇下呢一節有啲咩字啊？分 beseech B-E-S-E-E-C-H 動詞 ask someone urgently or fervently to do something。implore, entreat 中文會叫做促請、懇請，我懇請你快啲去做一啲嘢，希望有人會快啲去做一啲事，盡快去做。呢一節就嚟到呢一度，下一節就大結局。我想講Don Quixote同吉柯德之旅咧，都算係頗為漫長嘅，前後我諗大概都有2個月或以上。佢亦都影響咗我非常之多嘅一部作品。我自己都好期待呢個結局。我哋下一次繼續讀你聽啦，拜拜。大家好，讀你聽嘅時間，今日繼續讀Miguel de Cervantes嘅Don Quixote，我哋讀到 Part 2嘅第74節，呢一節咧係結局篇。呢一節嘅名叫做 Of How Don Quixote Fell Sick and of the Will He Made and How He Died。咁樣上一回咧就講Don Quixote翻到去村入面，同佢身邊嘅人講話，佢要放低佢嘅長矛，放低佢嘅騎士身份呢1年。呢年期間佢都有搵啲嘢做，佢諗住咧去牧羊。 但係由於牧羊咧係體力勞動嘅事啦，而佢本身都係一個地主階級，佢嘅管家、佢嘅親人咧同佢講話：你做唔嚟㗎，你放棄啦，你倒不如翻去做騎士都好過你牧羊。咁我哋呢一個篇章咧就睇下Don Quixote點樣去度過佢呢一年。
As nothing that is man's can last forever, but all tends ever downwards from its beginning to its end, and above all man's life, and as Don Quixote's enjoyed no special dispensation from heaven to stay its course, its end and close came when he least looked for it. For, whether it was of the dejection the thought of his defeat produced, or of heaven's will that so ordered it, a fever settled upon him and kept him in his bed for 6 days, during which he was often visited by his friends, the curate, the bachelor, and the barber, while his good squire Sancho Panza never quitted his bedside. They, persuaded that it was grief at finding himself vanquished, and the object of his heart, the liberation and disenchantment of Dulcinea unattained, that kept him in this state, strove by all the means in their power to cheer him up, the bachelor bidding him take heart and get up to begin his pastoral life, for which he himself, he said, had already composed an eclogue that would take the shine out of all Sanazaro had ever written, and had bought with his own money 2 famous dogs to guard the flock, one called Basino and the other Butron, which a herdsman of Quintana had sold him. But for all this Don Quixote could not shake off his sadness. His friends called in a doctor, who felt his pulse and was not very well satisfied with it, and said that in any case it would be well for him to attend to the health of his soul, as that of his body was in a bad way. Don Quixote heard this calmly, but not so his housekeeper, his niece, and his squire, who fell weeping bitterly, as if they had him lying before them. The doctor's opinion was that melancholy and depression were bringing him to his end. Don Quixote begged them to leave him to himself, as he had a wish to sleep a little. They obeyed, and he slept at one stretch, as the saying is, more than 6 hours, so that the housekeeper and niece thought he was going to sleep forever. But at the end of that time he woke up, and in a loud voice exclaimed, "Blessed be Almighty God, who has shown me such goodness. In truth his mercies are boundless, and the sins of men can neither limit them nor keep them back." The niece listened with attention to her uncle's words, and they struck her as more coherent than what usually fell from him, at least during his illness. So she asked, "What are you saying, Signor? Has anything strange occurred? What mercies or what sins of men are you talking of?" "The mercies, niece," said Don Quixote, "are those that God has this moment shown me, and with him, as I said, my sins are no impediment to them. My reason is now free and clear, rid of the dark shadows of ignorance that my unhappy constant study of those detestable books of chivalry cast over it. Now I see through their absurdities and deceptions, and it only grieves me that this destruction of my illusions has come so late that it leaves me no time to make some amends by reading other books that might be a light to my soul. Niece, I feel myself at the point of death, and I would fain meet it in such a way as to show that my life has not been so ill that I should leave behind me the name of a madman. For though I have been one, I would not that the fact should be made plainer at my death. Call in to me, my dear, my good friends the curate, the bachelor, Samson Carrasco, the master, Nicholas the barber, for I wish to confess and make my will." But his niece was saved the trouble by the entrance of the 3. The instant Don Quixote saw them, he exclaimed, "Good news for you, good sirs, that I am no longer Don Quixote of La Mancha, but Alonso Quinzano, whose way of life won for him the name of good. Now am I the enemy of Amadis of Gaul, and of the whole countless troop of his descendants. Odious to me now are all the profane stories of knight-errantry. Now I perceive my folly, and the peril into which reading them brought me. Now, by God's mercy, schooled into my right senses, I love them." When the 3 heard him speak in this way, they had no doubt whatever that some new craze had taken possession of him, and said Samson, "What, Signor Don Quixote? Now that we have intelligence of the lady Dulcinea being disenchanted, are you taking this line? Now, just as we are on the point of becoming shepherds, to pass our lives singing like princes, are you thinking of turning hermit? Hush, for heaven's sake, be rational and let's have no more nonsense. All that nonsense, said Don Quixote, that until now has been a reality to my hurt. My death will, with heaven's help, turn to my good. I feel, sirs, that I am rapidly drawing near death. A truce to jesting. Let me have a confessor to confess me, and a notary to make my will. For in extremities like this, man must not trifle with his soul, and while the curate is confessing me, let someone, I beg, go for the notary. They looked at one another, wondering at Don Quixote's words, but, though uncertain, they were inclined to believe him, and one of the signs by which they came to the conclusion he was dying was this so sudden and complete return to his senses after having been mad. For to the words already quoted he added much more, so well expressed, so devout, and so rational as to banish all doubt and convince them that he was sound of mind. The curate turned them all out, and left alone with him confessed him. The bachelor went for the notary and returned shortly afterwards with him and with Sancho, who, having already learned from the bachelor the condition his master was in, and finding the housekeeper and niece weeping, began to blubber and shed tears. The confession over, the curate came out saying, Alonso Quixano the Good is indeed dying, and is indeed in his right mind. We may now go in to him while he makes his will. This news gave a tremendous impulse to the brimming eyes of the housekeeper, niece, and Sancho Panza, his good squire, making the tears burst from their eyes and a host of sighs from their hearts. For of a truth, as has been said more than once, whether as plain Alonso Quixano the Good or as Don Quixote of La Mancha, Don Quixote was always of a gentle disposition and kindly in all his ways, and hence he was beloved, not only by those of his own house, but by all who knew him. The notary came in with the rest, and as soon as the preamble of the will had been set out, and Don Quixote had commended his soul to God with all the devout formalities that are usual, coming to the bequests, he said, Item, it is my will that touching certain moneys in the hands of Sancho Panza, inasmuch as between him and me there have been certain accounts and debits and credits, no claim be made against him, nor any account demanded of him in respect of them, but that if anything remain over and above, after he has paid himself what I owe him, the balance, which will be but little, shall be his, and much good may it do him. And if, as when I was mad, I had a share in giving him the government of an island, so, now that I am in my senses, I could give him that of a kingdom, it should be his, for the simplicity of his character and the fidelity of his conduct deserve it. And then, turning to Sancho, he said, Forgive me, my friend, that I led thee to seem as mad as myself, making thee fall into the same error I myself fell into, that there were and still are knights errant in the world. Ah, said Sancho weeping, don't die, master, but take my advice and live many years. For the foolishest thing a man can do in this life is to let himself die without rhyme or reason, without anybody killing him or any hands but melancholy's making an end of him. Come, don't be lazy, but get up from your bed and let us take to the fields in shepherd's trim as we agreed. Perhaps behind some bush we shall find the Lady Dulcinea disenchanted, as fine can be. If it be that you are dying of vexation at having been vanquished, lay the blame on me, and say you were overthrown because I had gerved Rocinante badly. Besides, you must have seen in your books of chivalry that it is a common thing for knights to upset one another, and for him who is conquered today to be conqueror tomorrow. Very true, said Samson, and good Sancho Panza's view of these cases is quite right. Sirs, not so fast, said Don Quixote. In last year's nests there are no birds this year. I was mad, now I am in my senses. I was Don Quixote of La Mancha. I am now, as I said, Alonso Quixano the Good. And may my repentance and sincerity restore me to the esteem you used to have for me. And now let the master notary proceed. Item, I leave all my property absolutely to Antonia Quixana, my niece, here present, after all has been deducted from the most available portion of it that may be required to satisfy the bequests I have made. And the first disbursement I desire to be made is the payment of the wages I owe for the time my housekeeper has served me, with 20 ducats over and above for a gown. The curate and the bachelor Samson Carrasco, now present, I appoint my executors. Item: It is my wish that if Antonia Quinzana, my niece, desires to marry, she shall marry a man of whom it shall be first of all ascertained by information taken that he does not know what books of chivalry are, and if it should be proved that he does, and if, in spite of this, my niece insists upon marrying him, and does marry him, then that she shall forfeit the whole of what I have left her, which my executors shall devote the works of charity as they please. Item: I entreat the aforesaid gentlemen, my executors, that if any happy chance should lead them to discover the author who is said to have written a history now going about under the title of Second Part of the Achievements of Don Quixote of La Mancha, they beg of him on my behalf as earnestly as they can to forgive me for having been, without intending it, the cause of his writing so many and such monstrous absurdities as he has written in it. For I am leaving the world with a feeling of compunction at having provoked him to write them. With this he closed his will, and a faintness coming over him, he stretched himself out at full length on the bed. All were in a flutter and made haste to relieve him, and during the 3 days he lived after that on which he made his will, he fainted away very often. The house was all in confusion, but still the niece ate and the housekeeper drank, and Sancho Panza enjoyed himself, for inheriting property wipes out or softens down in the air the feeling of grief the dead man might be expected to leave behind him. At last Don Quixote's end came, after he had received all the sacraments, and had in full and forcible terms expressed his detestation of books of chivalry. The notary was there at the time, and he said that in no book of chivalry had he ever read of any knight-errant dying in his bed so calmly and so like a Christian as Don Quixote, who amid the tears and lamentations of all present yielded up his spirit, that is to say, died. On perceiving it, the curate begged the notary to bear witness that Alonso Quinzano the Good, commonly called Don Quixote of La Mancha, had passed away from his present life and died naturally, and said he desired this testimony in order to remove the possibility of any other author save Cide Hamete Benengeli bringing him to life again falsely and making interminable stories out of his achievements. Such was the end of the ingenious gentleman of La Mancha, whose village Cide Hamete would not indicate precisely, in order to leave all the towns and villages of La Mancha to contend among themselves for the right to adopt him and claim him as a son, as the 7 cities of Greece contended for Homer. The lamentations of Sancho and the niece and housekeeper are omitted here, as well as the new epitaphs upon his tomb. Samson Carrasco, however, put the following lines: A doughty gentleman lies here, a stranger all his life to fear, nor in his death could death prevail, in that last hour to make him quail. He for the world but little cared, and at his feats the world was scared. A crazy man his life he passed, but in his senses died at last. And said most sage Cide Hamete to his pen, Rest here, hung up by this brass wire, upon this shelf, O my pen, whether of skilful make or clumsy cut I know not. Here shalt thou remain long ages hence, unless presumptuous or malignant storytellers take thee down to profane thee. But ere they touch thee, warn them, and as best thou canst, say to them, Hold off, ye weaklings, hold your hands, venture it let none. For this emprise, my lord the king, was meant for me alone. For me alone was Don Quixote born, and I for him. It was his to act, mine to write. We two together make but one. Notwithstanding, and in spite of that pretended Tordesillas writer, who has ventured or would venture with his great coarse, ill-trimmed ostrich quill to write the achievements of my valiant knight, no burden for his shoulders, nor subject for his frozen wit, whom, if perchance thou shouldst come to know him, thou shalt want to leave at rest where they lie the weary mouldering bones of Don Quixote, and not to attempt to carry him off, in opposition to all the privileges of death, to old Castile, making him rise from the grave where in reality and truth he lies stretched at full length, powerless to make any third expedition or new sally. For the 2 that he has already made, so much to the enjoyment and approval of everybody to whom they have become known, in this as well as in foreign countries, are quite sufficient for the purpose of turning into ridicule the whole of those made by the whole set of the knights errant. And so doing shalt thou discharge thy Christian calling, giving good counsel to one that bears ill will to thee. And I shall remain satisfied, and proud to have been the first who has ever enjoyed the fruit of his writings as fully as he could desire. For my desire has been no other than to deliver over to the detestation of mankind the false and foolish tales of the books of chivalry, which, thanks to that of my true Don Quixote, are even now tottering, and doubtless doomed to fall forever. Farewell.
好，呢個大結局終於喺一個悲傷嘅氣氛之下落幕。當叫一提回鄉之後，佢咧就發燒昏迷咗好幾日，醒翻咧就同大家講，佢再唔係 Don Quixote of La Mancha， 佢只係 Alonso Quixote。The Good 係一個好人，點解好咧？因為佢終於清醒過嚟，佢懺悔佢過去沉迷對於遊俠精神嘅沉迷，佢終於甦醒過嚟啦。佢而家咧係非常之怨恨，非常之憎厭有關遊俠嘅呢啲書，佢再唔相信呢一套。眾人聽到啦，因為上一回都仲喺度同佢計劃緊點樣一齊上山牧羊啦，又改名，又點樣去度過呢一年，等佢東山再起。但係呢一刻，大家都以為 Don Quixote 係咪有再神志不清啊？咁但係 Don Quixote同佢講，佢話唔係，我真係甦醒過嚟。對於 Dulcinea 係唔係解除咗咒語咧，佢都唔再關心啦。咁 Sancho 同埋其他人當然又話：你唔好怪自己啦，你怪我哋。但係咧，當時我哋都係唔聽，佢就堅持咧要佢哋嘅朋友請一個公證人嚟，佢要立遺囑。咁個遺囑嘅內容主要就係將一啲酬勞交俾 Sancho 啦，之前喺呢一個遊俠嘅期間嘅賺與蝕所得嚟嘅盈餘，佢都會交俾 Sancho， 亦都會支人工、支薪水俾佢嘅管家，最後佢所有嘅財產都會俾佢嘅兒生女啦。有個條件嘅話就係兒生女嘅丈夫係必須要唔睇過任何關於遊俠嘅書，或者中意睇呢啲書。如果佢有睇啲書，而佢個兒生女堅持嫁俾佢咧，咁佢嘅財產咧將會被沒收啦。當佢係自行放棄財產啦，咁說明咗Don Quixote真係好唔中意遊俠啊！佢立咗啲遺囑之後咧，都無奈嚟到過身啦。書入面咧就形容 Sancho 或者佢嘅親戚，佢哋都明顯冇咁傷心啊，因為佢哋分到遺產，咁啊內心咧就好過咗好多。故事結尾就係以作者嘅一段說話嚟作結，佢都係狠狠地去批評冒充佢嘅呢個作者同埋佢嘅作品，有關於 Don Quixote Part 2呢個假冒嘅 Part 2竟然早過佢自己真正嘅讀本嘅面世，亦都流行起上嚟。佢就此亦都係再次狠狠地批評。而佢咧亦都話，真正嘅 Don Quixote 已經係長眠。Don Quixote 因為我而生，亦都因為我而死。我而家咧寫到佢死咗，佢亦都唔會再有任何嘅歷險故事嘅出。最尾嗰句咧令我有啲困惑。作者最尾嗰一句咧，佢就話佢好高興寫咗本書，令到讀者好憎厭奇怪或者唔係真實嘅騎士書本。但係呢一樣精神就同呢本書大部分嘅內容，尤其是Don Quixote嘅遊俠精神係有衝突嘅。所以作者最後呢句說話嘅意思係令到大家憎厭嘅係一啲假冒佢嘅作品啦，一啲唔係真實嘅作品，定係所有嘅騎士精神嘅書，當然係一啲誇張失實嘅騎士精神嘅書。佢係一個點樣嘅意思咧？我自己係傾向係後者嘅，如果唔係佢就會同呢一個成個咁長篇嘅著作有好大嘅衝突。我覺得作者只係針對一啲模型嘅，又或者一啲好誇張、好離譜、偏離真實得太遠啦嘅一啲書。而當Quixote喺書入面嘅表現呢，佢真係都睇咗好多偏離真實好遠嘅、好浪漫主義嘅騎士書。我諗作者其實都係針對冒充佢嘅啫。呢本書好長篇啦， 我睇咗咁多節，翻譯咗咁耐，我對於呢個作品嘅睇法，對於呢個作者嘅睇法就係佩服，亦都覺得佢係一個前無古人，甚至講係後無來者。佢算係一個前無古人嘅作家啦，喺生於17世紀寫埋。佢又好有前瞻性，佢會同讀者互動，佢知道係一啲普世價值觀，而佢嘅思想係絕對係企喺當年嘅普世價值觀之前。無論係關於宗教、女性主義、男性處身喺社會嘅價值、唔同種族之間嘅相處關係呢啲嘢咧，佢都係屬於企喺前。咁你話係咪同今時今日企得好貼咧？咁當然唔係啦，即係佢都有佢嘅詬病。呢度我後面會講。咁但係佢起碼係一個有前瞻性嘅人啊，唔單止同讀者互動，經常打破第四道牆，仲會識得自嘲，亦都透過 Don Quixote，透過故事嘅人物，好有條理、好清晰咁樣表達咗佢對好多事情嘅一啲睇法，而係非常之理性，非常之有條理，係一個有智慧嘅人，亦都係一個有學識嘅人。點解話有學識咧？因為Don Quixote唔單止係行陸路啦，又行海路啦，又有啲神秘學嘅嘢啦，又有啲好社會百態事啦。佢所有嘢都有涉獵，連天文學都有涉獵，所有嘅天文地理乜都有涉獵到。咁喺文中嘅字裏行間咧，係有流露出嚟。要詬病佢嘅當然都有，就係頭先講。如果你話用今時今日嘅普世價值，當然作者係有佢嘅缺失啦。咁但係呢樣嘢我覺得又唔係好公道，因為人哋畢竟係幾百年前嘅人，就冇理由用今時今日嘅普世價值去批判佢。但係有啲明顯嘅我都可以講，譬如佢經常用女性嘅美貌去推動故事，因為呢個女子幾咁靚，幾咁經世脫俗，於是乎所有男人咧都圍住佢團團轉，而為此咧亦都推動咗故事。有一啲係愛情，有啲係殉情，有啲係三角關係啦，甚至乎四角關係。咁但係相貌平庸嘅女子又如何啊？咁佢咧就會用村姑啊，用佢係無禮，又或者佢一定係中咗巫術，諸如此類呢啲咁嘅嘢去描寫，或者佢係少少蕩婦咁樣嘅角度去寫呢啲冇咁靚嘅女子，呢啲係相貌主義得好緊要啦。某程度上都係一種歧視。當然仲有其他嘅一啲種族上嘅分隔，寫一啲 more 就點，當然都係寫佢哋好，係因為佢哋願意轉教，即係由佢哋嘅回教轉做天主教，所以就寫得佢哋好啦，寫得佢哋開明。但係調翻轉冇呢咁嘅例子嘅。而最後我覺得作者要了結 Don Quixote 嘅生命，當然係佢唔想再俾人繼續冒充佢嘅作品呢一次期啊。但係佢多次喺佢嘅文字入面真係寫咗落去，喺佢嘅文章入面、故事入面去批評呢啲咁樣嘅冒充者咧，我覺得係過於辛辣。我相信佢應該係內心實在太憤怒、太不平，佢冇辦法之下咧，要直情將佢呢啲負面嘅情緒咧發泄咗喺故事嘅文中入面。因為我個人覺得佢再唔高興都好咧，佢唔好喺自己嘅作品一面去寫、去批評，佢就喺文章嘅以外、故事文章以外佢自己去發表一啲睇法，去散文又好、講話又好去批評。但係佢好明顯，佢係認為只能夠寫喺個故事入面，先至令到呢個信息廣傳。我相信佢係咁樣嘅諗法。咁樣無疑咧，就令到故事抽離得嚟咧，就令到個故事蒙上一陣好負面嘅情緒。而呢個負面嘅情緒咧，最後亦都係最尾呢個章節咧爆發咗。因為我個人覺得Don Quixote佢吸引人嘅地方，唔單止係佢不屈堅強、有信念，將冤都咬成直，一個接近瘋狂嘅浪漫主義、融合主義，而令到呢個角色令到人哋覺得佢係與眾不同。佢係特別，你唔好理佢係唔係黐線，起碼佢嘅行徑吸引咗你先。咁但係佢到最後呢個章節，今日的我打倒昨日的我，打倒得好徹底，而作者亦都結尾加多一句咁樣嘅說話，咁令我覺得，咦，咁你咁樣係咪會打倒咗成個故事、成個人物咧？咁難免會蒙上一陣疑問，一個咁樣嘅陰影。 不過我自己都係偏向相信呢，作者由頭到尾只係想打擊佢嘅對手嘅啫，佢就唔係想踩呢個遊俠精神多一腳嘅。因為Don Quixote所表現出嚟嘅遊俠精神實在係太正面、太動人，令人覺得呢個世間上冇咗一個遊俠精神，少咗個遊俠係何其可惜呢。好，同大家分享幾個字。Dispensation 名詞 exemption from a rule or usual requirement 特許恩准。Disbursement disbursement 名詞 the payment of money from a fund 撥款。Compunction compunction 名詞 a feeling of guilt or moral scruple that prevents or follows the doing of something bad 悔疚自責。好，Don Quixote呢就讀到嚟呢度啦，我哋下一節繼續讀你聽，拜拜。